Welcome, everyone, to today's episode of Cerius Leadership, Business Insights for Business Leaders. This is where we bring a member of our network into a conversation around a subject in which they are a subject matter expert. To start that is the president of Cerius, Kristen McAllister.
Thank you so much, Chris. And welcome to everyone who's joining us today, talking about creating a product story and messaging that will sell any product, including ourselves, which we know is sometimes one of the hardest things to do, is to sell us and our expertise. And today we have joining us Fiona Pietruski. I just have to say, Fiona, thank you so much. Known each other for years. I'm so excited to finally get you on one of our leadership webinars. And as a brief introduction, Fiona's just one of those marketing mavens who's often brought in as a marketing coach for entrepreneurs and CEOs. It's so tough when you are a subject matter expert, you're a founder, and you need help figuring out, what do I want marketing to accomplish, and how are we then going to manage to that? Fiona, thank you so much for joining us.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me. I'm really, really pleased to be here. It's a topic I love talking about.
We're going to jump right in here. And as Chris mentioned, feel free to click on the chat. We will continue the conversation on LinkedIn. Any questions, any thoughts, advice, you want to learn more about Fiona. For anyone where we end up looking at bobbleheads and yep, oh, and gosh, I wish you would mention this, feel free to mention it online on LinkedIn and connect with Fiona afterwards. So I would say you're a marketing maven coach for entrepreneurs and CEOs. When you're first sitting down with an entrepreneur, CEO, founder-led, business owner, you name it, where's that starting point? Are you jumping in and saying, show me everything you've done in marketing so far?
No, and actually I'm just starting this process with a new client as of a couple of weeks ago. And it's always the same type of conversation. Marketing can be very wide. Depending on the type of organization, it could be very evolved. But often when I get brought in, it's because it's evolved and it's kind of lost its path. So often for me, it is just identifying, like, how much do you have in place today? And is that still where your business is? So getting really clear about where you are today and where you actually want to go. So my first questions are usually around, do you have a marketing plan? Do you have a clear baseline for your messaging that you can work from? And sometimes that baseline may have deviated, or it may have just continued to grow, but not in a clear direction. And so it's really understanding what's already in place, and then trying to think about, is that still relevant to your business and what you want to do and the direction you want to go in? I see this often take the form depending on how the business started. So sometimes I'll go to a business where the CEO is very involved in the product development. But as that business has grown, they've become much more closely tied to the investors or their advisory board or people who have different voices, and that's no longer your customer. And so what I see happening sometimes is the language starts to sound a lot more like investor speak than customer speak. And so sometimes it's just a little bit of readjustment of, like, okay, the terms that we're using, the language that we're using is no longer how your customer thinks about you or your product or solution or service, but it's actually started to sound too much like board level language, and we need to kind of bring it back to clarity. And marketing is about clear, crisp, concise language. So really carefully choosing the words and not overcomplicating it, because if you do, it's consumed by the customer. It's too complicated, it's too confusing. So often when I step into a role, it's really, okay, where are we today and where might we have gone off track? Or have we evolved and now the things that we were measuring ourselves against are no longer relevant? So those measures are going to look odd. Are we successful? What is that goal that we're looking for? So that's often, where I'll start.
And you just led right into the number one question that we get from business owners, which is what should I be measuring and how do I measure my marketing success? They always want that one number. How do I know it's working? How do you figure out what's our goal for marketing? What do we want to accomplish?
So I always like to start with a vision. And actually I'll talk about this client that I'm working with right now. As we're talking about marketing, it's actually taking several conversations to get clarity on the vision. And sometimes the vision might only be about the product and not about the business. And that's a common mistake, is to like, I want my product to be, the biggest in market and serve these customers. Okay, that's actually more of a product focused vision. What about the business overall? Where do you want to be? What kind of market share do you want to command? And sometimes when I talk about that with clients, it's really about getting clarity on the vision. And then marketing can actually work from that goal back. And usually, the clearer you can be about your goals to a marketing team, and we can talk a little bit about, how teams can look. They can be very, very different in marketing, depending on the organization. But, as long as you have clear goals, a marketing team should be able to break that down into, okay, this is what I need to deliver. This is how and when I need to deliver it. And this is how I'm going to measure myself against those goals. As clear as you can get on time, budget. I know it sounds obvious, but sometimes a marketing team will get, we need this done in 3 months. What they won't get is, you need to do it with, $100,000 or $10,000, doesn't really matter, but it needs to be really clear. And then they can set their plan. And planning is a huge component of marketing. Otherwise, you end up just doing busy work. So without those clear goals, the busy work starts, and then you end up wondering, like, why didn't we get there in 3 months? And a lot of times it's because the plan wasn't clear enough and wasn't actually going to get you there in the first place. So I would say that is kind of a big part of set the vision, be clear about where you are today, and then think about where you're going and what those really clear goals are going to be.
And you just mentioned kind of the cornerstone of that plan is we've got to know who our customers. When we started the business, our customer were investors, and our marketing plan was a pitch deck that had a $5,000 marketing budget in it. Now we've got to shift that to who are our customers? Who are we selling to? How are we selling? Walk us through, because the customer is the person that you're going to wrap your story around. How are you figuring that out? How are you getting to know those customers?
Yeah, so it is, once you have your vision and you have kind of your clear goals, the very next thing you should be doing is looking at customer information. Do you have a really strong customer and you wish you could have more people like that? Or do you have some data on a collection of customers that really are making up the major share of your business? Those are the people you want more of. Those are the people you should talk to. And, a good customer can just be a gold mine for marketing. It can provide you with good language. It can give you examples. You can get case studies. You can get leadership from those good customers. And the gold mine of information is something that shouldn't be underestimated. So spending time with customers is key. And again, as a business evolves, often what happens is people kind of think they know their customer, but unless you actually talk to them and understand, regularly what is going on in their world, different factors are coming in, and often they're affecting all of your customers. And so understanding what those things are that are pulling at them is really key. Looking at their competitors, not just your own competitors, that can be a good way to get an understanding of what's at play for your customers. So one of the things that, I would do first is really look for customer data, customer testimonials. What is it that's coming through? And then I really like to use my customer's own language as a start point for any marketing language. You really need to understand deeply what their needs are. So you may think that your product or your service is solving a problem for them, but actually when you talk to them, it may be 3 or 4 different things. So getting really into the detail is important because those are the things that you need to be talking about the most. And so there are a couple of different ways to do this. There's a lot, if your organization is large and you have a huge volume of customers, then you probably want to break it down into industries or segments, or maybe by their title. Maybe in some cases you're working with executives, and in other cases you're talking to lower down in the pecking order, and you need to speak to them in their terms. So that's very important. You can't talk to everybody. That's the easiest way to fail, is say one thing to all of your customers, and it just doesn't get heard. So it's important that you look across your market and see where you can make the messaging more appropriate and be talking about your product to them in terms that they really understand.
That's a tough thing because I don't want to give up any potential customer. I want it all, Fiona, and I want it yesterday, and I want it. You can see how marketing plans and strategies get built here. How do I prioritize and narrow that down to create the right brand story messaging?
That is the tough exercise, is actually ranking your needs, ranking your customers. You might not think of them as your best and worst, but you really do need to think about, who do I want to focus on first? Trying to do it all usually ends up with, not coming off with the crispest, the most crisp message, or really articulating your product in the right way to that group. So, when I think about creating different messaging for different customers, it's important to kind of take a step back, think about what it is that they are looking for, and make sure that you have that first, second, third focus. So an example with a client that I have worked with, when I looked at their website and when I looked at their materials, they had really a Bible of product information, but their website was really cluttered. It wasn't clear who they were. I couldn't really tell what was their first product that they wanted to sell. And actually the result for them, and where we ended up and have continued to grow, is actually creating 3 different business lines. It was so cluttered. Nobody could really understand where those different groupings were. And it really was like drinking from the fire hose for a customer coming to their website. And that's what it feels like to a customer. They can't consume all of that information. So that's why it's important to really rank first, second, third, and think about that hierarchy, because actually when you're building your customer language, what you're really building is a hierarchy of your language. What do I want to say first? Who am I? What do I do? Those big messages. And then next, you're going to move into what is it that I think I can solve for you? And then you get into the detail. But you really need to bring your customer through that cadence of communication. Otherwise, they just get lost in the mix of messages. So it is really important that you lay it out for your customer. And this has become more and more important as digital channels have evolved, and now everybody does their research online. So just bear in mind, they might not know you, and they might be flipping from one site to another doing their research. If you're not crisp and clear in that first click, they're going to move on to the next site. And if that site does a better job and they explain their product better, that's a lost opportunity for you. So it is really, really important, particularly in today's kind of online world, that you really are clear about your messaging up front, and that you prioritize the things that you need to say first.
There's a lot of information there, from the research to the prioritizing to, it almost sounds like a journey I want to take them on or take them through. How are you organizing this? Is it a framework, or is it the good old fashioned marketing plan? How are we pulling this all together so that we're clear. In order for our customer to have clarity, we've got to have clarity, our teams need to have clarity.
Yeah.
How are we organizing this to make sure that we're doing it in everything, so that no matter who they're talking to, whatever the touch point is, as you said, they've got clarity on this journey we want to take them through.
Yeah. And so I should say marketing has a lot of frameworks, right? It is kind of the bedrock for marketing is that we have frameworks we can work with. But what I find with the different clients and customers that I work with is that they don't want cookie cutter, right? So it isn't like, okay, take this framework and we'll solve your marketing problems. That is often not going to work. So what's important is one, like developing the right framework, but there are a few that I always kind of fall back on because they're simple. They're easy to put together if you already have expansive marketing and you're like, I've done all the projects, I've done all the research, I've done all the work. I just need a little, tune up, or I need a little realignment. Then, some of these frameworks we can fall back on quickly, pull in all of your key and core marketing messages, and then really go through a quick process to provide clarity around messaging and your customer needs and where your product can deliver. So one that I like to use a lot is actually a messaging platform. And that messaging platform or messaging framework actually helps you to start with kind of macro messaging. So you're going to think about your product value, your value proposition, what is it broadly? But then once you have that messaging, you're going to think about, okay, what is my brand personality? Can I really, in just a couple of sentences, think about what that is and how should I talk to a customer group? So you're really kind of starting to think about how you're going to come off to that particular customer group. And to give you an example that I'm working on right now, talking as a company that creates a product experience, so a packaging product experience for a customer group. You may be talking to designers that want to understand how that packaging is going to look. And if you're talking to designers, then you want to be using designing type language. What does it look like? How does the customer react to it? Are they wowed by it? Do they want to use innovative colors? Are they thinking about, the texture of a material? That's really how designers think and work and what they get really interested in. If you're talking to the C-suite, then it's a completely different set of language tools that you're going to use. You're going to start talking about ROI and sustainability, perhaps, or you might be talking about, time from order to delivery and some of the logistic elements. So you really need to be clear about who is it that you're going to talk to. And then, of course, to make it more complicated, you might be talking to the designer at the start of the journey, but then you might end up talking to the C-suite for the sign-off. So you are going to have to think about when and where are you going to talk about those two different customer groups. And I do see often when I'm talking to companies that have evolved, they've evolved away from what their original plan, and now they have a lot more to say. They have a lot more places to say it, and they're talking to a whole range of customer groups and customer levels versus before maybe it was just one conversation with one person and they could close the sale. So it is, it does get, as you grow, it's a good problem to have. It does get a little bit more complicated. And I think sometimes that's why a framework can help you really think about clearly who those customer groups are, the messages that you're going to provide for them, and how you're going to lay out that journey for that customer type. And so in that messaging framework, we will think about what the pillars are of your product, your business. So what are the top 3 things that you think your customers want? And where are the proof points that you can actually deliver on that? And so creating this framework will lay out for you those 3 pillars, the customer problem, where your proof points are, the language that you're going to use to that group. And that becomes something that you can give to everybody in your marketing, your sales organization, so it's something that everybody can keep coming back to. So everybody stays consistent and is thinking about how they talk to customers in those very clear terms, rather than let's just tell them what we told the last customer, or it worked with this customer, let's try that again, which is often what happens. And it unfortunately it can become a bit of a Frankenstein, because you're just adding, sometimes people will add a new channel. Let's try social media and we'll just use the same language there as we've used before. Or let's try a new business line and we'll just kind of add on and we'll evolve a bit. That's fine. But if you're really trying to grow your business, it often ends up where your marketing team or your marketing agency are doing a lot of busy work. They're just spinning their wheels because they're pushing out new messages and they don't really know, what's working, what's not working, because they don't have that baseline in place. At least if you put everything down in a framework, you can say, you know what, that's not working anymore. Let's go back and rethink that language and make sure that it's really hitting the target successfully. So yeah, so that's a really useful framework that I like to keep coming back to, and has served me well.
And we see that pitfall a lot as to tactics before strategy, which also is what do I say on my website? Just tell me what to say before we get into what's the story that you're going to take your customer through. So now we really understand our customer. We know what their pain points are. We know that journey. How are we coming up with that overall story that our messaging platform is then built on? And you hit on it a little bit with they have a problem. We've got to prove. I want to dig into that. Someone said, let's double click on that a bit. And how are we creating that story, which is really the journey that we're going to control and walk them through?
Yeah. And so this is, like I said, I do love to bring an existing customer. If you have one, I love to bring the existing customer story in. And so, but story arcs and the art of storytelling has been around for years. And I'll use a recent example that I've been working on, where the headline of the website is, and I'm going to mix it up a little bit because I haven't told them I'm going to be talking about them, but their kind of opening line is basically construction excellence, right? That is the headline on their website. True, they do have construction excellence, but that doesn't really sell it. It's not compelling. And I'll be honest, everything that follows is very deep and too much information. So they've gone straight from this is what we should be thought about for, straight into a lot of detail. And what's missing, and I have to say this is a really common mistake that people make, is that they don't do that kind of process of guiding through people in a compelling way. Really, your website has a few jobs to do. And it has a lot of stakeholders often that you're trying to address, but those few things that you really need to deliver on are: what do you do? How on earth do you work with them if it's a service or a product? Like, how do we get it? And then you want to go into some proof points. Why this company? What is it that's so special about them that, that really you want to kind of work with them? And then a lot of what customers, clients are looking for today is, how do I show them that they can trust me? And so that becomes a big component of what your homepage of your website, which has to be the hardest working, on your site. And if you can say that with images, if you have a product or a service where there's images, they can work really hard for you as well. And so on the website, what you're trying to do, and when you want to tell a story, is make that opening line more compelling. And every headline on your website should tell a little bit more of the story. And so storytelling usually works with a hero and a guide. And so you really want to think about what is the role that I play here and how can I pull people through this journey so that they understand who I am, what I bring to the table, how I can help them, and how together we can skip off into the sunset. So you really do have to think in those terms, and it's effective because it's memorable. So it's compelling. It really gives people a sense of who you are, and the language that you use really helps to kind of bring together your ideas. But I often think of, and I use this a lot, you have to make sure that you hit on head, heart, and hands. So you need to hit kind of the head part, the logic. Does this add up? Is this product really the solution for me? The heart part is often it's going to be about relationships. So can I provide some emotive reason that they would work with me? Do I have great ethics? Do I build great relationships? Does everybody give me 5 stars for the level of service that I provide? And is that something that I can bank on? So am I really, do they love my origin story, like why I did this? Sometimes that can be really compelling. And then the hands part is, who do you call? How long does it take? What does it cost? Is this in my budget? So you need to make sure that you nail that. Otherwise, you make it difficult. It's like, okay, you've got me now. What do I do next? So those are really some key things to think about, when putting messaging together and when thinking about how people are going to receive your message. And I think this applies way beyond, marketing on a website. It really does come down many other areas of communication that you should really be thinking about, how will that be received? How is that message more compelling than just stating the facts, which is easy, I'm this, and this, or my company does this, and this. Yeah, that's true, but it's not compelling. It's not going to enrich how they think about who you are or make them really want to buy. And we know that people will buy when they feel a connection. So you really do have to think about the heart part is, where is that connection coming from, and how am I aligning with perhaps what my buyer is looking for?
And I love it. You said it's not just the website. We're using that because it's such a simple, clear messaging that you can do from top to bottom. Many on the call, our LinkedIn pages are our websites. And when you start to look from top to bottom, are we taking our customers through that journey of, I'm their guide, they're here, the hero, here's the pain they're in, here's what I then want to start, here's how I can help them solve it. And bam, we all walk off into the sunset. And here's what it looks like, just like these 2 client testimonials. You can be like them. And it's almost watching a Hollywood blockbuster, or I will say it, my Hallmark movies, where you let them know how it's going to end.
Absolutely.
I'm going to take you on, and that's fantastic. We've got a couple of minutes left, Fiona. We've got that story, and each of us has our own story and understanding. We talked about the research. You talked about the brand platform a little bit. I know that I will get comments if we don't at least spend a minute on how can we leverage AI to make this all easier.
Yeah, and it's a great point, and I think we should all be there. In fact, one of the things that I've been doing recently is going into organizations and just let me look at your marketing, and let's figure out how we can get AI, across the organization. It starts with everybody doing a little bit, right? Everybody needs to get their hands into AI and figure out how they can use it. And so that messaging platform, that messaging framework that I talked about becomes essential when you're talking about AI, because in that messaging framework, you're going to think about not just the words that you're going to use, but what the tone of voice is. And so we think about tone of voice, or tone and voice, as being the personality and the mood that you set with your language. When you take that to AI, and this goes for images as well now too, it's, it is really useful for marketing, but you can take the way that you have laid out your tone of voice and how you define it, So all of the ways that you define your marketing, you can now put that into your AI tool, and it will give you 1,000 different ways that sound like you. And that's the important thing. If you don't do that upfront way of kind of defining who you are, defining what you're about, defining who your customer is, then you're making it harder every time you go to AI. Once you have that framework, you're just going to cut and paste it into AI and make your request, and you will get the language. Obviously, you need to kind of review it and make sure it hits your guidelines, but that framework allows you to kind of double up, or actually 10x the language and the content that you were creating previously. So it is really critical. I like to put AI into everything. I think it's a no-brainer. I think while it is, while it's here, it may, we may have some guidelines that descend on us that we have to start following, but using it in everything that we do, I think is important to encourage a marketing team to bring their best ideas and to try and start putting a process in place. This is where we use AI. This is how we use it. And this is the process that we're following. So actually being quite clear and documented, because it, and I've been around for a while, there have been a lot of new platforms and new solutions, and they can go haywire pretty quickly. So AI is definitely a good example of that. I think be deliberate, be inclusive, allow everybody in your organization to start using it, but just make sure that there are some guardrails there so that we're all talking about how we're using it. We're sharing our ideas. We're making sure that everybody is checking in to say, I'm using it for this. That's okay, right? So that we don't kind of go off the rails quickly. But, as far as marketing is concerned, AI should make your team significantly more effective and efficient. But using it in the right way, using it carefully, obviously, I think improves the results that you can get for sure.
Perfect. And I love that you talked about the process, and it's one of those things where it's only effective if we are clear on, here's the tone, here's the audience, where we can put it into our settings even. Because if you don't put in the settings, you're going to sit there for 4 hours saying, I didn't like that, give me something else. I didn't like that, give me. But if you have your marketing brand, your story, those guidelines that you're putting into the settings and saying, here's what I want, you put in your request, it spits it out, and it's following those guidelines. So I feel as though it's even more guiding us toward doing the right thing and getting clarity first on who are we talking to and how do we want to talk to them. And to your point, what's that story and that journey we want to take them through.
Absolutely. And, there are tools in AI now that will do a lot of that work for you in terms of, they'll help you add your prompt. So who your brand is, and you should always be really clear on that. You add it into a tool, and they will, they've evolved enough now that they'll actually do a lot of work for you. So another thing to be aware of is that there are a huge range of different AI tools that you can now go straight to. So it helps you jump a few steps, and often, many of them are free. So definitely, not a decision around cost, but maybe something to think about in terms of, how you want your team to be using it before you jump into some of those more powerful tools.
Fantastic. And we certainly can share some online. I thank you so much for joining us, Fiona. I know that there's some additional questions, some commentary I'm already seeing on our LinkedIn post. If you have any great brand stories, any suggestions, or any tools that you've used that Fiona is mentioning, please do come share them on the LinkedIn posts. Feel free to connect with Fiona, one of my favorite conversations that I get to have. Thank you so much for being with us today on Cerius Leadership, and we'll see you next Tuesday.